One of the more difficult, challenging aspects of attempting to reveal the truth of what's happening in Venezuela is undoing 25 years of propaganda from our government in Washington, D.C. and their allies in the mainstream media. When you see the Washington Times, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the New York Post, Bloomberg, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, all on the same sheet of music, that should terrify you. But yet, we still see people parroting this garbage story about evil, terrible, horrible socialism, or this terrible dictator repressing his people in Venezuela, the dictator that's won 2 elections, appointed by a guy who won 4. What the U.S. doesn't tell you is that this last election that they say now didn't exist, the U.S. was invited to observe those elections and refused to go. The UN went and observed and saw no irregularities. The opposition party, the people that are responsible for this woman Machado and random guy named Juan, they begged the UN not to go and observe. Now ask yourself a question. Why would the opposition party decide we're not going to participate, but we don't want anybody else observing that election? We're just going to call it fraudulent right up front, and we're not going to offer any evidence of it and not participate in the election. These are the people that are pronouncing themselves the leaders of Venezuela now, with the help of the Stasi in D.C. Right after this happened, this recent hiccup, meaning 2014, 2015, they put out this chart attempting to prove their point that, see, Nicolas Maduro, he's the problem. But unfortunately, it has the opposite effect, because to anyone with a critical mind, it would make you ask a lot of questions. First of all, Hugo Chavez took power back here in 98 and 99. Now, what they believe in down there, the Bolivarian Revolution, which is, of course, based on Simon Bolivar. There's a country down there named Bolivia. People are getting confused. There's the Bolivian military, and there's the Bolivarian military, which is the military of Venezuela. It's another point. Why didn't this all fall apart in 98, 99, 2000, 2001? Why, when we had our huge hiccup here in the United States in 2008, why didn't they collapse then? Where were the riots then, if this was the case? What the U.S. doesn't want to tell you is what happened prior to Hugo Chavez. There was massive starvation. There was a huge squandering of the wealth in Venezuela. That's true prior to Hugo Chavez. The Caracazo riots, basically the idea here in 89, when the U.S. was in charge and just to take in charge, they were going to ask the people of Venezuela to pay nearly a half a day's wages for a tank of gas. It was mind-boggling, killed thousands. But of course, this is buried in the media. Now, this was 89, 90. You have to remember at this time, most people didn't have access to information about South America like we do now, where you can just go online and you can read about things happening all over the place. At this time, meaning the 80s, late 80s and 90s, the U.S. had a vice grip on all of the information. In 98, there was a storm that hit northern Venezuela, killed thousands of people, because most of the people, 80%, were living less than $2 a day. This was under U.S. rule. This was the neoliberal model they want to go back to in Venezuela. Now, some people are asking, well, why would the U.S. want to do that? Well, it's real simple. It enriches big oil companies. What they don't tell you is about the 1975 ban on oil exports. Big oil hated that. It banned big oil from pumping oil out of the United States and selling it for profit on the open market. But it didn't ban them from pumping oil out of other countries and selling it for profit. And down here, there are no labor laws. There are no restrictions. There are no requirements to treat people any certain way, especially at that time. So they were raking in huge profits. Huge profits. Somebody dies on one of their rigs down here? No big deal. Scrape off some dirt, throw them in it, cover it, give the people, the family a couple $100 and shut them up. Next batter up. Minimum wage. This is what they were doing. They couldn't do it in the United States because, of course, here we have these evil, terrible, horrible laws that say you have to pay people a living wage, that you have to provide a safe work environment, that you have to insure people. These are the things that Americans that take for granted. And I know a lot of you think, well, that's not socialism. Oh, yes, it is. Oh, absolutely, yes, it is. Because if big business and the neoliberals, meaning the big pro-business laissez-faire types, had their way, they would be paying you, there would be no minimum wage, and they wouldn't pay shit if anything happened to you on the job. They would do everything they could to not pay you. They still do today, even with the laws that exist. Down here, it was a slave plantation in the 90s, and that is not exaggerating it. This is what the U.S. and big oil wants to go back to. That is what this is all about. This is why they have demonized Chavez, because what he did, and USNI actually did some actual reporting. I've covered this before. I talked a little bit about this, but I want to continue because it's important that people understand, how did Chavez come to power? How did Maduro come to power? Why would these people have ever elected an evil, terrible, horrible dictator? There was a two-party system in Venezuela, just like we have here. And they had squandered the wealth of that country and enriched a very tiny elite group of people. And USNI confirms that. Political situation, page 8, I will link the report. All right, Venezuela's rejection of the country's two traditional parties, Acción Democrática and COPEI, called the Social Christian Party, which had dominated Venezuelan politics for the previous 40 years. Most observers attribute Chavez's rise to power to popular disillusionment with politicians whom then they had judged to have squandered the country's oil wealth through poor management and corruption. Sound familiar? These are the allegations they're making against Chavez and Maduro that aren't true. What these people are trying to make you believe is this: that a soldier and a bus driver that decided the wealth of that country belonged to its people and then took the money and got rid of illiteracy, got rid of infant mortality, got rid of poverty, put people in homes, educated people, and brought Venezuela into the first world. That's what U.S. Miami-based Venezuelans think is squandering the wealth of Venezuela. That's their definition of squandering the wealth of Venezuela. Because if you think there's racism in this country, you have no idea the class schism that goes on down there. There is, elitism at a level that would even make some of the worst racists in America take a breath. They see a certain segment of their population as worthless and throwaway. These elitists in Miami. And make no mistake, when you hear people that say, oh, I'm a Venezuelan, and when Chavez took over, it was terrible, and we lost everything, it's those people. And they're right. They're absolutely right. For many, many years, they were super, super wealthy, and they could do whatever the hell they wanted to on the backs of slave labor. And when Chavez took power, that all went away, and yeah, absolutely, taxes went through the roof. They weren't nearly as rich as they had been before. But there's a whole giant section of that population that is a whole lot better off now because of Chavez and because of Nicolas Maduro. So there are two Venezuelas. So they're not I guess, technically lying when you hear these Venezuelans talk about, oh, how bad things got under Chavez. Yeah, for the ultra wealthy, for the elitists, it absolutely did. They're not going to show you these pictures on Fox, on CNN, on Bloomberg, on New York Times, New York Post, Washington Times. They're not going to show you these pictures of all of the people that support the current government down there, because they took the country back for the people. Sorry about that. They're only going to show you these protesters and this random guy named Juan and some woman named Machado, who think now that they can just elect themselves in the face of the people because they have the United States on their side. I have talked about why it is so important that the U.S. people like you and me, understand this issue in Venezuela. Many of you have said, well, this is just going to be another Libya, another Iraq, another Syria. Oh no, it's going to start out looking like that. But when shit kicks off down here, and it's soon, this is going to be an enormous wake-up call for the American people. There are 600 million people living in Latin and South America. They are a very proud people. And while we all know our story of us getting rid of the crown of England and gaining our independence, these people have their own story. Their George Washington is a man named Simón de Bolívar. And I've heard it both ways, Simón de Bolívar and Simón Bolívar. So either way, point being is they had their own revolution down here. And they threw off Spain. Now, the King of England or the Queen of England has nothing on the King and Queen of Spain at that time. They controlled half the known world and 80% of its wealth. You never heard of the English Inquisition, did you? But there was the Spanish Inquisition, and the South Americans threw off those chains. They are a very independent-minded people, and whatever problems they have are their problems. If you think for 1 minute they are going to accept this, you are out of your mind. There are going to be a whole bunch of people that control the media that are going to show you pictures of full grocery stores and happy Venezuelans. They're going to show you that. Anybody can take a picture of anything. But what's going to come next is going to shock everyone. This entire region is going to be lit on fire from Antarctica to Panama. They are going to unite. Argentina, Chile, they remember Augusto Pinochet, the U.S. dictator that got installed when Allende was killed. They remember us having to go down there and get rid of our own dictator, Manuel Noriega. This isn't something these people have forgotten about. The difference is we're not going to have Riyadh. See, when we went over and did our little regime change thing in Iraq, we had this big giant safe base in Saudi Arabia to operate from. We're not going to have that down here. I know a lot of people think, oh, we'll just operate out of Colombia. There, our friends. The Colombians have their hands full with the ELN and the FARC, and believe me, once U.S. boots get on the ground down there, there's going to be a whole lot more ELN and a whole lot more FARC sign up to go kill Americans. Because they see us as the evil empire, and boy, I tell you what, the way we're acting right now, and by we, it's a hard thing. It really is, because I don't demonize my neighbors that disagree with me politically. I don't demonize the people of Texas for supporting the current administrator, even though I don't like him. We're all Americans. But what's going on in Washington, D.C. does not represent us. Especially in this case. There are 600 million people living in South and Latin America. And this does not end well for us. This isn't going to be something where we go down and carpet bomb. It's not going to be something where we go down and see a nice 80-mile-long highway out in the middle of a desert with nothing but a line of tanks where our F-15s can just sit and take pot shots. This is a jungle. It is all a jungle. And these guys have been fighting down here for my entire lifetime, my parents' entire lifetime, possibly, some of them, my grandparents' lifetime. It's a way of life. They understand it very clearly, and they would rather die than live under the thumb of the United States. The people of Venezuela, the ones that have duly elected the current government, are not going to go into the night quietly. They are going to fight. And I'll say it again, they don't need the Chinese. They don't need the Russians. They have 1.6 million under arms. Their militia, not including their military. And they've just gone through 5 years of food shortages. That's not, something that's going to be a problem for them. I've talked about shit it's the fan before. You call it shit it's the fan, they call it Tuesday. We have a completely different impression of what poverty is. This is going to be a very, very bad event if our administration doesn't shake this off and realize what's going on. These people are not going to, and by these people I mean South Latin America, are not going to accept this. And I'll say this one more time. Brazil. They will wait. They will watch the U.S. get clobbered. And they will come in and they are going to sweep through this entire continent. And they will take the resources for themselves. This man in charge of Brazil is dangerous. He is the most dangerous leader that has come to power in South America, probably in 100 years. Many people don't know the extent to which the Brazilians have military, I guess the best word would be efficacy. But I will leave it there. This is the legacy, Lake Maracaibo, of big oil in Venezuela. This is what we do. And this is why they hate us. If most Americans knew this, they wouldn't have allowed it. But they manipulate the information, they hide the information, and our only hope is to govern ourselves. I'll link a PDF to that statement that I made a couple of days ago on the Communities tab, so you guys can have that for yourselves. If leaders may lie, then who should tell the truth? I think that pretty much sums it up. Like, share, subscribe.